Hi, welcome back to a new video. It's the third time that I'm recording this intro, the third day in a row, because always some things changed in between. Originally, I wanted to have AMD, Intel and Nvidia in the same video talking about their keynotes and highlights. But then we figured out a lot of very interesting things about Nvidia's RTX 5090, so we will have a dedicated video upcoming probably in 2 days. And today's video will be about Intel and AMD. First of all, Intel and their keynote, some announcements about the new chipset, some also weird things they did in the keynote, also some weird advertisements about B860 and overclocking, which is obviously not working, and also the entire debacle about AMD, their keynote where they just out of nowhere didn't mention RDNA 4 at all, then some weird changes about the name, and then another statement they did about the naming, which made everything even more confusing. You surely saw the Seasonic MagFlow fans in one of my videos before. Seasonic also offers them in an ARGB version. With a different fan blade design, RGB inside the frame and also subtle RGB in the center, these fans focus on both design and performance. The MagFlow ARGB are also daisy chainable and can easily be expanded and connected by the integrated magnets that couple the fans without additional clips or tools. Seasonic also includes a small RGB controller if you want to avoid annoying software issues. Find out more in the link below. For all the three vendors, obviously the big topic is and was AI. To my taste, a little bit too much.
Generative AI, incredible AI experiences, and leadership AI capabilities.
The AI PC.
AI models.
A great AI PC
Dell AI Factory.
is enabled with AI.
AI innovation.
We're starting with Intel and the interesting pieces. That was especially that Intel confirmed that Intel 18A as a manufacturing technology is on the road as expected. And at the same presentation, they also noted that Panther Lake is gonna come this year. So that both together makes sense. Panther Lake will be 18A and it will also be a mobile CPU. It is expected that there will be not a desktop CPU of Panther Lake, so no Panther Lake S, but rather probably Nova Lake. But there was no mentioning of both Arrow Lake and Nova Lake in this video, so nothing about desktop CPUs. Intel also launched their new mobile CPUs, Intel Core Ultra 200H and 200HX, with the 285HX being basically the flagship. And we kind of know these CPUs from Arrow Lake Desktop already. We know they're quite efficient, so that could be interesting for mobile as well. What I also found interesting is that how many times Intel mentioned that it should be a good year, 2025, to buy a new PC.
And I think this year, we can convince our customers it's the year each one of us should buy a new PC. This is the reason 2025 is the year to buy a new PC.
Absolutely. Maybe the sales numbers for Intel are not that great if you're going that far that you constantly have to remind your audience to tell your friends to buy new PCs in 2025. Yeah, it's a bit odd. On the same day, they launched B860 chipsets. Previously, only C890 was existing for Arrow Lake, and now there's also B860, which is supposed to be a cheaper option for that socket. The B860 chipset is cut down in terms of features, especially when you're talking about USB. You can still have PCIe 5.0 on the GPU and for one M.2 drive, which is fine. What is not so fine is that overclocking, again, as usual with those B chipsets, is not supported. That is something that AMD is still doing better. And it kind of blows my mind that Intel, you know, they're behind, like far behind on desktop. Still, they didn't learn anything. They're still locking down the B chipsets. You can at least do memory overclocking on those chipsets, but that's basically it. Robert Hellock from Intel then did another presentation about the new chipsets, also the Intel Arrow Lake non-K CPUs, and he did that quite well. He's just very good at this. They are supposed to arrive almost the same time as the B860 motherboards. Not sure why it's not simultaneously. At least from what I read online, the CPUs are supposed to be available on January 13th and the motherboards on 17th. Would have made sense to launch them on the same date. Like non-K and B860 chipset kind of goes well together. And also, if you maybe saw those CPUs before, they have an interesting heat spreader design. So the heat spreader is a little bit smaller in terms of surface contact area compared to the K Arrow Lake CPUs. But I mean, the Arrow Lake CPUs, they're not hot and they're very efficient. So it probably doesn't matter that they decreased the contact surface for those non-K CPUs. I'm not sure why exactly they did that. That's probably to be tested, to be determined. but I'm also not sure how much sense those CPUs will make. It will just depend on the price and maybe availability. Yeah, we have to test that once the CPUs are available, or if AMD will just remain the better option. The B860 motherboards are supposed to be available from January 17th, and I just picked some options to compare it. ASUS Prime B860K is supposed to cost 167 euros. Considering that this is the cheapest option for ASUS and B860, that's not really that cheap. It goes up to the Strix B860F gaming Wi-Fi for 324 euro, which is still 160 euro cheaper than the alternative board for C890. Yet, if we compare both motherboards in terms of the I/O area, you can definitely see where those boards were cut down, and that B860 definitely has a lot less features, at least in the I/O area. I then also spent a bit of time investigating some of the motherboard models from the different vendors, checked how are they advertised, and I was a bit surprised how much I could read the term overclocking. For example, here this is definitely misleading from ASUS, at least first look, because overclocking seems to be the biggest, I don't know, written font size thing on this chart. You can see overclocking, but as a reminder, B860 can do a lot compared to C890, but what it definitely can't do is CPU overclocking. But if you read further into this, then you will realize that it's only NPU overclocking of the CPU, not the CPU cores, which can, in certain AI workloads, probably increase performance, but for anything that's probably more relevant, like gaming or any other normal application, it will definitely not change anything. So that's kind of, at least to me, first look, a little bit misleading. I found something similar, or maybe even a little bit worse, at least when it comes to the wording on the AROS website. I looked up the B860 AROS Elite Ice, and then I scrolled down into the middle of the page, and they said AI overclocking for peak performance using AROS AI Snatch. AI Snatch. AROS. Who came up with that name? Please check a dictionary and look up what Snatch can stand for. I mean, I have to kind of comply to probably the YouTube guidelines, so I can't maybe openly translate it, but if I just hack this into ChatGPT, it will definitely tell me that calling my AI Snatch program that way, yeah, the AI tells me not to do so. So that should maybe, yeah, let you think. Well, at least if we go back into this and check out what AROS is posting, then they say or claim that we can overclock our CPU by like 5%, which again, in my opinion, is misleading because it doesn't clarify in which way, because again, CPU multiplier, CPU core clock cannot be adjusted. MSI is also doing the same thing, not as bad because they lack the AI and some strange naming, but they also go with their one-click overclocking, which they have been using this term for a long time, and they also claim that you can increase the CPU performance, which is definitely, from my side, questionable. And just in time, last minute, I also received a B860 motherboard. The top-of-the-line B860F gaming Wi-Fi from ASUS has a Gen 5 M.2 slot right here, Gen 5 X16 for the GPU, has another 3 M.2 slots on the bottom underneath these covers. The only thing I'm missing for this price point, honestly, is a real debug LED. There are those indicators for like CPU, memory, VGA detection, which is not bad, but especially considering the price, I would honestly expect a real debug LED with the code. So yeah, if anything goes wrong, it is just much easier to find the cause for this. But apart from that, if you're looking for a non-K Arrow Lake CPU, that might be a good pair. And now to wrap up the Intel keynote, Intel managed within 39 minutes to mention the word AI 56 times, or at least have it directly put on display, which gives us a performance metric of 1.5 AIs per minute. Let's see how the others can do. Now going over to the presentation from AMD, I watched this yesterday live. Well, I'm shooting this video on Tuesday, so that might not directly align with you, but when I was watching the keynote, I didn't plan to make a video on this, but I felt like I was wasting 45 minutes of my lifetime, and that's why I decided to make this video and at least give you the information that might be interesting and leave out all the unnecessary rest. Probably the most exciting, at least for the desktop gang, is the announcement of the 9950X 3D and the 9000X 3D, which was kind of as expected, also no surprise. As in the past, one CCD is with X3D cache, the other one is with normal Zen 5. So there was no surprise I was hoping last year for at least a certain amount of time that AMD would maybe do a special CPU with dual X3D dies. That would be amazing. Maybe they can still do it, but yeah, at least for now, this is not coming. The 9950X 3D is supposed to be about 8% faster on average in gaming versus the previous 7950X 3D. I think that kind of sounds plausible, and also that they claim that the 9950X 3D is about 20% faster than a 285K. I mean, we know what a 9800X 3D can do, so I would say it's roughly in line, maybe plus minus a few percent here and there, depending on the game or application. But I think that sounds plausible. And with the 16 cores, the 9950X 3D is definitely a cool CPU. Looking forward to test that one. And availability is supposed to be March. They also announced the HX3D CPUs. So that will be X3D CPUs for mobile. And I think if you're into gaming mobile, then that can definitely be interesting. We know how strong the X3D CPUs are, and having this in a mobile definitely gonna be interesting, and it's supposed to launch or come to the market in the first half year of 2025. Apart from that, and with a lot of technical difficulties in the AMD presentation with this echo in the beginning,
I'm so happy to be here with you today.
And then some weird cuts in the presentation.
In Ryzen AI Pro.
Hello, Jack and CES. I'm proud to Jack and CES. I'm proud to say.
No worries, we'll keep going.
And pretty strange AI comparisons and claims.
It's clear that AI is the new electricity.
Unfortunately, there wasn't much interesting in the AMD keynote. And if you were following this live, then everybody was shouting, where is RDNA 4? Where are the GPUs? But they only mentioned this for a brief second.
We absolutely love the gaming community, and we look forward to telling you more about RDNA 4 and FSR 4 later this quarter.
So RDNA 4 only later this quarter, which was a surprise, especially considering that AMD briefed press prior to the keynote about RDNA 4, gave them some insights, but then didn't mention anything in the keynote. That was pretty odd, and yeah, also disappointing. Like, if you watched the live stream chat and the comments underneath the video, the majority was disappointed. But luckily we have those slides that were given to the press, such as Gamers Nexus, or in Germany like Hardware or Computer Base, and we could just use those slides to get an impression. And it always is astonishing, or is impressive, how close the leaks are to the reality in the end. So if you consider that this was basically leaked weeks ago about the new naming and the expected or not expected performance, then this is pretty close to it. Because looking at this slide, AMD kind of indirectly confirms the somewhat disappointing performance and the weird naming. RDNA 4, as expected, will be manufactured by TSMC in 4 nanometers, so that is the improvement over RDNA 3, and it will exclusively support FSR 4, which was a surprise, at least to me. I thought they would somewhat support still the previous generation, and especially if we go back to the slide and see how AMD ranks the 9070 XT, then this is also kind of an odd choice. So you could have the 7900 XTX, which has more performance than a 9070 XT, and you will not be able to run FSR 4. FSR 4 is supposed to be like the DLSS alternative, using AI to improve your performance for AMD graphics cards. But yeah, the choice of FSR 4 being exclusive for RX 9000 is kind of weird, and I saw a lot of disappointed comments about that. And to go back about the entire naming change thing and this slide, where you can see that AMD ranks the RX 9070 XT directly compared to the RTX 4070 or 4070 Ti, AMD then claims that they did the name change to be better comparable to the direct competition, which just doesn't make any kind of sense, because Nvidia just announced the 5070, and I'm pretty sure you can't, it's not the same performance level. A 4070 will not be the same performance as the 5070. So what? AMD, you want to be with your new upcoming GPU, you want to be comparable to the previous gen of the direct competition? That just doesn't make any kind of sense. But it also kind of fits the weird stuff that AMD is doing always with the name change. I mean, if we look into this table, then we can see the longest name streak that AMD managed to do was from HD 2000 to HD 7000. But it seems to be much more of a habit from AMD to stay within the same naming for 2 generations or maximum 3 generations, sometimes only also just 1 generation. But now AMD also in this small slide noted that the RX 8000 will be RDNA 3.5, so mobile GPUs, which also is a completely weird choice. But at least AMD this way already managed to have 2 generations, so they might as well change it directly after. At least I can't imagine that they would have the RX 10070 after. I'm not sure, the naming sounds a bit weird, and if you just write it down as a name, RX 10070 XT, it just looks wrong. And I would not be surprised if AMD would just change the name again directly afterwards. But AMD maybe surprised me. At least from the current knowledge, there will not be an RX 9090 or 9090 XT, at least from the current rumors. AMD will not have a flagship GPU for RDNA 4, as you probably already all know. One day later, and we have an update on Tech Power Up, because they were sitting down with AMD after all the critics regarding their keynote, not mentioning RDNA 4, and then AMD was giving some questionable answers. For example, regarding RDNA 4 and FSR 4 not being mentioned in the keynote, they basically said they didn't have enough time, which I find a pretty lame excuse considering that you had enough time to mention AI 92 times. And I mean, you're determining the length of your own keynote, right? It would be easy to extend it by 10 minutes or even just 5 minutes and talk about the upcoming GPUs, which you just didn't do. AMD then again also confirmed that the 9070 naming scheme is because of the comparison or possible comparison to the competition. At the same time, they also noted that currently and also no leaker can really determine the performance because there is no final driver available for RX 9000, which also just doesn't make any kind of sense. I mean, AMD, you published the slide where you basically said you want to have this comparable, the 9070, with the 4070 or 4070 Ti. And now you're saying that nobody can compare the performance. And I mean, how do you want to compare the performance with the 5070 while nobody has 5070 drivers? This all just doesn't make any kind of sense. And regarding FSR 4, it is also interesting because the slide noted that FSR 4 will be exclusive for RX 9000, but now AMD said, maybe there will be some specific previous generation GPUs that will still support it. So maybe we will be lucky and still get it on the RX 7900 XTX or some other cards, but that is all just not clear at all. And in a further question, they asked about how AMD wants to proceed with the naming, if they want to keep the same naming scheme and then, for example, continue with the RX 10070 XT, how we already discussed it in this video. And AMD basically said they don't want to commit to a specific naming scheme, which kind of confirmed my theory that they might just move away from the naming scheme after renaming this, and the next generation might be called completely different. What a chaos. How is it possible that a company this size acts so weird? I don't get it. And talking about weird namings, we continue with the B850 chipsets. That is the new chipset by AMD, which was also oddly not even noticed in the keynote of AMD. Maybe because it's nothing special, because the B850 is kind of like just a renamed B650, but it has a guaranteed single M.2 slot with PCIe 5.0. And the main GPU slot, X16, you have on a B850 motherboard is not guaranteed 5.0, it's guaranteed 4.0. So you have to be careful if you're getting B850 and maybe one of the new NVIDIA graphics cards, you might want to get PCIe 5.0, then be careful to pick or get the right choice. Apart from that, B850 is not really anything exciting, it's just a new naming. It's newer, it's maybe more expensive. I'm not quite sure what the reason for this is. I'm also not quite sure why AMD skipped a chipset naming again. I mean, that was already the case with X870 when the new Ryzen 9000 came to the market. Because if we look in this chart, you can see AMD started with 300, 400, 500, 600 series chipsets, and then they thought, okay, 700 just doesn't sound nice. We skip it. We go to 800 to be on the same level as Intel. And Now we have AMD B850 and we have Intel B860, which can be oddly confusing for the customer. There is no benefit of having the same naming scheme, at least from my perspective, especially considering that AMD is the market leader in desktop CPUs. Maybe do your own thing. Why do you make it like, it looks like you're running after Intel when it comes to the chipset naming. It was the same in the past with X299 Intel CPUs, and then you started the Threadripper with X399. It already looked like copying Intel, but now it's just, yeah, I'm not a fan. I'm still a bit confused why AMD did not mention the chipsets and RDNA 4 in their presentation. But now we want to measure their AI performance because that seems to be the thing they care about the most. We already know that Intel managed to mention AI 56 times. AMD was a lot better, Intel. You maybe have to improve your game, but AMD mentioned AI 92 times in their presentation, which gives them a performance ranking of 2.24 AIs per minute. That means that every 26 seconds, if you had to listen to the keynote, you had to suffer and hear the word AI. Every 26 seconds. Are you kidding me? Yeah. That was interesting. Intel and AMD, not that nice, but NVIDIA was very interesting, so we will do that up next. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Bye-bye.